Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
First, a word from our sponsor. The Daily Compliance News for April 13, 2022, the Ukraine Risk Edition. And we begin with that story from the Wall Street Journal, which points out that political and economic risks from Ukraine are erupting far from the battlefield. An article by Richard Vandefort from the Risk and Compliance Journals, even when companies with operations far from the war should consider exposure to political risk, as rising food prices could fuel insecurity. Additionally, the Risk World Conference, which is currently ongoing, has reported that prices of fuel and foodstuffs are increasing, and there are shortages of fertilizer. So, as one participant said, it's almost like now the situation as if there's a full moon and a high tide all together. All of today's stories come from the Wall Street Journal. Next up, New York State's attorney or lieutenant governor is arrested on public corruption charges, or rather indicted. New York Lieutenant Governor Brian Benjamin was indicted on public corruption charges Tuesday for what prosecutors said was a bribery scheme. From 2019 to 2021, Benjamin participated in a scheme to obtain campaign contributions from a real estate developer, the indictment alleges. He used his influence as a then state senator to obtain a $50,000 state grant for a nonprofit controlled by the developer. Next up, sanctions spur calls to make private equity vet investors. And this is a very interesting article, once again from the Wall Street Journal, that in an effort to clamp down on potentially illicit Russia and Chinese money in the U.S., lawmakers are urging new rules to make private fund managers disclose more information about their investors. Several bills pending in Congress require investors, such as PE and hedge funds, to verify and report the identities of their investors. 2 groups of senators asked the Treasury Department to make private funds subject to AML requirements, and that would certainly be a change. Our final story comes from the Risk and Compliance Journal. Dylan Tokar reporting, as Crypto.com has hired a financial crimes expert from Western Union to help with its financial crimes compliance program. He's a former regulator and prosecutor who will oversee efforts to ensure the fast-growing online cryptocurrency platform isn't used for crimes such as terrorist financing and fraud. Duncan DeVille will serve as Singapore-based company's EVP for compliance in the Americas region and its global head of financial crimes. He'll report to the company's chief compliance officer. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.